Bernie Sanders in Washington. What his meetings with top Democrats, including President Obama, mean for his campaign. War on ISIS. The U.S. sends more military forces to step up the fight. The Pope's plans for World Youth Day. His July visit to Poland will take him to a notorious Nazi concentration camp. And Christians cooperating in the Holy Land. The overdue effort to repair the site where Jesus rose from the dead. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 9th, 2016. Good evening. Thanks for joining us from Washington. I'm Brian Patrick. No big surprise, President Obama endorses Hillary Clinton. This after his meeting today with Bernie Sanders, who then went on to the Capitol to meet with other Democrats. Our team coverage begins with Chief White House Correspondent and Political Director Lauren Ashburn.
Brian, the formal endorsement came in a video tweet. Hillary Clinton blasted it out to her 6.6 million followers.
Look, I know how hard this job can be. That's why I know Hillary will be so good at it. In fact, I don't think there's ever been someone so qualified to hold this office.
She followed it with this tweet. Honored to have you with me, POTUS. I'm fired up and ready to go. H. Sanders says he is going to wait until Tuesday's last primary here in the district until all votes are counted before making an announcement. And while he didn't say he'd drop out, he vowed to join Hillary Clinton in defeating Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders arrived this morning from Vermont after requesting a meeting with President Obama. The two seemed in a jovial mood while walking into the Oval Office. After an hour meeting, he addressed reporters, stopping short of endorsing Clinton, but finding common ground in defeating the Republican nominee.
Donald Trump would clearly be a disaster as President of the United States. It is unbelievable to me, and I say this in all sincerity, that the Republican Party would have a candidate for president who in the year 2016 makes bigotry and discrimination the cornerstone of his campaign.
Hillary Clinton is already celebrating her nominee status and is counting on Sanders' supporters, especially younger voters. Clinton is also exploring the prospect of a female ticket.
I'm looking at the most qualified people, and that includes women, of course, because I want to be sure that whoever I pick could be president immediately.
Now, progressive Senator Elizabeth Warren is leaning toward supporting Clinton, and her name is being floated as a potential vice president. Jason Calvi joins us now with more on Sanders' other Washington events. Jason.
Lauren, Sanders returned to his Senate office today. He also had a high-profile meeting here at the Capitol. The top Democratic senator says that Sanders has accepted that Hillary Clinton is the presumptive Democratic nominee. The hall barely passable outside Senator Bernie Sanders' office today. He snuck out a side door, avoiding the mob of cameras. Then he sat down with Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. Reid says they had a very nice meeting. Reid says Sanders will help with the party platform and be a good campaigner for Democratic senators. Senator Reid praised the outsider candidate today.
I'm so envious of you, the vitality, the energy you show. I said during this whole campaign, I've never seen you tired but once.
And Sanders has been invited to speak to all the Democratic senators next Tuesday. That's the very day when this whole primary season comes to an end, with Democratic voters here in Washington, D.C. casting their votes. Just to show that Sanders is in it to the very end, he has a big rally scheduled tonight right here in Washington. At the Capitol, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Here's some other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Thousands remember Muhammad Ali at a Muslim prayer service in Louisville, Kentucky. Salam alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ali joined the Nation of Islam as a young boxer, changing his name from Cassius Clay. He later used his celebrity to promote unity among faiths, races, and nations. The former heavyweight champion died Friday at the age of 74 in Arizona. Dignitaries, including former President Bill Clinton, will speak at his memorial tomorrow. The Navy confirms a second U.S. carrier group is nearing the Mediterranean Sea. Wyatt Goolsby is here tonight talking about this military move with a strong message for ISIS. Wyatt?
Brian, this is the first time in more than a decade 2 American carriers will be in the Mediterranean Sea at the same time. It hasn't happened since 2003 during the Iraq invasion. The second carrier projects power in a region still at war with ISIS. ISIS claims responsibility for both of today's attacks in Iraq. 2 separate suicide bombings killed more than 30 people, with dozens more wounded. The bombings come one day after Iraqi forces pushed farther into Fallujah, trying to retake the city from ISIS, which has held it for 2 years. The USS Harry Truman is supporting the operation by sending airstrikes. The aircraft carrier recently moved from the Persian Gulf into the Mediterranean. The Truman will soon be joined by the USS Eisenhower and its strike group of cruisers and destroyers. Dr. Sebastian Gorka is an expert in counterterrorism and irregular warfare.
This is a platform from whence you could deploy assets into the region should they be required. Secondarily, America, which has a dozen aircraft carriers, always sends a very strong message when it deploys a carrier group. So this has military significance by itself, but also a symbolic message that the administration wants to send to the region.
Gorka welcomes the move, but says it won't be enough to defeat the terrorist threat. Today, House Speaker Paul Ryan took it one step further, bashing President Obama for shrugging off ISIS. Ryan outlined a series of measures for defeating the Islamic State group and other extremists.
Do we think our allies have to do more? Of course we do, absolutely. But they will not do more to defend our shared interests if they think America will leave them in the lurch. America has to set the standard.
Ryan says Republicans in Congress must be prepared to deploy U.S. troops if necessary. It doesn't mean they will, but he says they cannot take any options off the table. Brian?
All right, Wyatt, thank you. And Israeli police raid West Bank workshops. They're looking for Palestinian weapons which they believe were used in a wave of deadly attacks. Surveillance video captures the moment 2 terrorists attack a Tel Aviv cafe Wednesday night. The gunmen killed 4 people before they were stopped. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah praises the attack as heroic, but the Palestinian president condemns it.
2 terrorists opened fire with automatic weapons at Israelis that were sitting in a coffee store. Both the terrorists were apprehended at the scene. One of them was shot. But the tragic result of that terrorist attack in the heart of Tel Aviv is 4 Israelis were murdered.
In response, the Israeli military plans to deploy 2 additional battalions in the West Bank. Pope Francis will meet with survivors of the Auschwitz Nazi death camp while in Poland for next month's World Youth Day. The Pope's schedule, just released, shows him there 5 days, delivering 6 speeches and preaching at 3 public masses. Francis will also meet with hospitalized children. A Vatican official says he's planning some sort of surprise. Christians in the Holy Land unite to renovate the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's built on the site where Jesus died, was buried, and rose from the dead. These are the first repairs in more than 200 years. Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and Armenian Christians are cooperating in the effort. Father Greg Friedman with the Franciscan Monastery of the Holy Land in America recently returned from the Holy Land. This is no small task, Father. You've got 3 of these denominations, and that is sometimes a pretty tense situation there.
That's right. Each group has its own rights and responsibilities in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's a very carefully worked out tradition over many, many years as to who gets what privileges at what time of the day, and if one oversteps the others, there can be problems. But hopefully it's working well now.
Could this cooperation help to build overall cooperation?
I think so. Any effort to work on something concrete, like the restoration of the shrine over the tomb of Jesus, I think is going to help us to better serve all of the people who visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
So I understand the renovations are really focused in that one area. Describe what's going on there and how it's funded.
That's right. We have a shrine called the Edicule, which dates back, in this case, to 1810. And over this time period, it is subject to smoke, a lot of flames from candle fires, the press of visitors, the natural elements, pressure from the construction itself as it was built back then. And this little structure, this little shrine is deteriorated. There are cracks, there are bulges, and you can see just the discoloring of the marble. So there's a lot of things that we've wanted for a long, long time to correct. In fact, the British 70 years ago put up a steel framework on either side to keep it from falling apart. So since that time, it's been a goal to get it fixed, and finally it's happening.
We heard the King of Jordan is contributing, but also the different churches, right?
Yes. In a work like this, each of the major communities shares equally. So they are each putting up $1 million of the $3 million cost. King Abdullah graciously has offered to contribute also $1 million. And I'm not certain where that money will go or how it will be used, but it's certainly a mark of his respect for the Christians in Jerusalem and also in Jordan, where he is the king.
Explain how the Franciscans have maintained and restored the Holy Land and also sort of duplicated it here in Washington, that particular site.
It's been the care of the Franciscans to be at the shrines and to care for the people of the Holy Land, really since the time of St. Francis in the 13th century. In centuries succeeding, the Holy Father gave us permission and gave us status in many of the shrines. So these places have been under our care for the Western Rite or the Latin Rite Catholics who come there. And here in Washington, D.C., the same group of Franciscans that's been doing this for 800 years, back in 1899, built a shrine with replicas of the Holy Land shrines so that people in the United States could get a chance to be pilgrims even if they could not go to the Holy Land.
And I've been there, and it gives you a sense of the distance between these various sites. It's very, very moving. Father Greg Friedman, thanks. You've added so much tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate it. Coming up, as California implements a new assisted suicide law, a Carmelite sister voices a Catholic response. And the Pope speaks out against euthanasia around the world. It is Thursday, June 9th. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. An Irish pro-life group denounces the UN Human Rights Committee, calling it a pro-abortion lobby group. That UN group claims Ireland's abortion ban subjects women to discriminatory, cruel, and degrading treatment. That committee, with no power to compel change, insists Ireland drop the ban immediately for cases involving fatal fetal abnormalities. Ireland permits abortions only in cases where the woman's own life is in danger. And California today becomes the fourth state to legalize assisted suicide. Los Angeles Archbishop Jose Gomez warns the poor could be pressured into taking lethal drugs to avoid costly medications. Other Catholic groups prepare for the impact that law may have on many marginalized Americans. Sister Mary Claire, CEO of Santa Teresita, a Carmelite-run assisted living center near Los Angeles, joining us by Skype. Sister, how might this law pose a threat to the elderly there in California?
You know, that's a great question. I think the main threat is what is demanded as a choice by some today ultimately becomes a demand of obligation for others in the future. And I think that that's the biggest threat. Right now, the elderly already feel a burden oftentimes to, not be so on their families, not to be a burden of care. And this law just adds an extra weight to that burden. Now with the option, they may feel the obligation to remove themselves from our society and from their families.
This message then to the marginalized, people struggling with health issues, is not a positive message at all, is it?
It's not. Unfortunately, I think the message is one of our smallness of heart and smallness of spirit. Instead of helping others to deal with the challenges and sufferings to help them alleviate the problem, where we're saying we'd much rather alleviate us of you, of the person, rather than the problem.
What important role do the elderly play in our society? Why is this end-of-life care such a crucial ministry?
You know, the elderly are such an essential part of our culture, and I think it's something that we really need to regain. They are an anchor for our society. They're a source of wisdom, a source of life's lessons learned. They're the carrying forward of the history into the new generation. And if we remove that essence from our society, I think we're going to find ourselves in real trouble in the future.
This final chapter of life can be very frightening for many. What message do you hope to offer them?
You know, I think the message of hope comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, in the very first verse. Our Lord, knowing that it was his hour to leave this world and go to the Father, he said he loved his own in the world and he loved them to the end. And that's ultimately our duty to one another, that we love each other to the end, and that in our faith, we can reach out to one another in those times of vulnerability and fragility and support one another until our Lord calls us home.
Sister Mary Claire, thank you for the good work the Carmelites are doing, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate it.
And Pope Francis tells a group of medical professionals euthanasia is the triumph of selfishness and of a throwaway culture. He says that culture rejects people who don't meet certain standards of health, beauty, or utility. His comments came in the Vatican during an address to the medical associations of Spain and Latin America. The Holy Father warns about what he calls alleged compassion justifying killing a patient.
La compasión, el padecer con, es de alguna manera el alma misma de la medicina.
Francis says true compassion does not marginalize, humiliate, or exclude, and does not celebrate the passing away of a patient. Alex Schadenberg, International Chair of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, is joining us from Rome. Alex, Pope Francis is very clear on this issue. How might he influence countries considering legalizing euthanasia?
Well, the Pope's statement today was excellent, and the fact of it is that the Church has a lot to say in a lot of our cultures throughout the world, and there's a great level of respect for the Holy Father's statements. But the important thing is he was placing the issue of mercy in with proper health care, and euthanasia, assisted suicide, which is about causing death, is not got anything to do with health care. It's about actually ending life.
And globally, which nations already back this idea of assisted suicide?
Well, sadly, Netherlands and Belgium have had it for a long time. Switzerland has assisted suicide. Netherlands and Belgium, it's euthanasia assisted suicide. As you know, my own country of Canada has now legalized euthanasia. It's still going through Parliament. It's a very sad situation for us that they're debating how to kill people. And today in California is the beginning of assisted suicide in California. So that sounds like a lot of bad news, but the fact is in most jurisdictions, when we've been battling against euthanasia assisted suicide, we've been successfully defeating these bills and defeating these propositions. The reality is, though, that there's been a shift in the idea, and we're forgetting that euthanasia assisted suicide, it's about actually killing somebody. It's been put into the wrong perspective. It's been defined by some people as healthcare. They're calling it merciful. It's not merciful when I kill somebody.
What are your goals as you meet with church leaders there in Rome, Alex?
What we've been doing is we've been talking about a strategy for reversing the tide, because right now you have a situation where you have the euthanasia movement and people who are bought into a false concept of what euthanasia and assisted suicide is, and they've all defined it under, they're saying this is all about my choice, it's about my body, it's all about autonomy, but it's not about that at all. What we're doing is we're working on a resistance concept, because there are a lot of people who have stories to tell, and we're trying to create a system for explaining those stories, for getting those stories out to the world about how this affects people in general. This is not a positive story for anybody. When someone is killed, others are negatively affected by it. And the fact of it is a lot of these cases are not about people who are demanding death, it's about people who feel they had no other choice.
Alex Schadenberg, International Chair of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, joining us from Rome. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much.
Up next, parishioners remember the victims of a deadly bicycle accident and how their faith guided their lives. And actress Helen Mirren brought attention to it this week. We discuss efforts to recover artwork seized by the Nazis. Pope Francis warns the Church not to be too rigid. He says we need to leave room for reconciliation. The Holy Father also says insulting others is like slapping their soul. Speaking during this morning's Santa Marta Mass, Francis says Jesus frees us from all our miseries. Thanks for joining us this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. 50-year-old Charles Pickett Jr. faces 5 counts of second-degree murder after his pickup truck crashed into a group of Michigan bicyclists. 2 of the 5 cyclists killed this week belong to a Catholic parish in Kalamazoo. Larry Pollock and Tony Nelson, both in their mid-70s, were active members of St. Thomas More Parish. Sister Pam Owens describes them as wonderful husbands, fathers, and grandfathers.
Both Larry and Tony cared for the less fortunate. They spent their time with the less fortunate, not seeing them as less fortunate, but as our brothers and sisters in faith.
Sister Owens says the parish community is in shock over this tragic loss. The U.S. Senate pushes to recover precious art stolen by Nazis decades ago. A Senate committee heard testimony this week on a bill allowing families to file civil claims to recover their property. One witness, actress Helen Mirren, starred in a film about a woman's quest to recover family possessions seized by the Nazis.
The very act of Nazi expropriation was not only unjust, but it was unconscionably inhumane. Restoring physical parts of lost heritage to Holocaust victims and their families is a moral imperative.
Murin was among 6 people testifying for the Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act. Alan Ronkin is D.C. Regional Director for American Jewish Committee, and Dr. Jem Sullivan is author of Beauty of the Faith, a former guide at the National Gallery of Art. Alan, how would this bill help Jewish families who lost so much?
Well, as you say, Brian, they did lose many, many things, and in many cases their art was a representation of who they were as families. You know what they say, what you hang on your wall really reflects who you are. And having it ripped away from them in that way was just a horrible thing. And I think this will really begin to re-establish what really was taken from them.
Jim, how would you say that the theft of art is especially criminal?
You know, the 7th commandment, you shall not steal, is the first place to start, but from that flows so many reasons. Art theft is a crime, such a crime, because ultimately art expresses the innermost reality of the human person, who is a member of a family, a community, a nation, a people, and a culture. So stealing art deprives not only those individuals and families, the owners and the artists, but also the entire community of their religious and cultural heritage. So a work of art really carries the weight of the creativity of the artist, the generosity of the patrons, but also carries the culture and the history of a whole community at a given place and time.
Alan, where is this art now, and how can it be recovered for these families?
Well, it's in many places. It can be with art dealers, it can be in museums around the world, it can be in someone's attic, not even knowing where they got the art in the first place. And so families go on a quest, essentially, to find their lost art. And sometimes you could be walking through a museum gallery and see a painting that belonged to your great-grandfather. Other times, you're in an art dealer. It really depends on where they happen to be at any given moment.
And I'm sure it'd be difficult to prove this, but I'm sure there's going to be some kind of a procedure in place.
Absolutely, yeah. The law requires the families to be able to identify and then certify that it was theirs and having some kind of proof of that.
Jem, what do you think taking back art would symbolize?
You know, I'm reminded of Pope, now St. John Paul II, who lived through the Nazi occupation of Poland as a young man. And he discovered culture as a form of resistance to the Nazi oppression. So he and his friends would gather together in a darkened room. They would be lit, the room was only darkened by lit by a candle, and they would recite Polish literature and poetry and drama, while the Gestapo was marching in the street below them. So I think art restitution really is an attempt to preserve the artistic and cultural heritage of individuals, families, and communities who were not able to resist the oppression and had to suffer the great, terrible injustices of the Holocaust. So it's important, it's symbolic, and it's the right thing to do.
Well, my own mother's family was probably affected by this, and I hope that this really is carried out. Are you confident that this can be something that will actually make a difference?
I think so, yes. I mean, there's so many families who have been trying to take back their art and have been thwarted in some ways by the laws, which have been a bit archaic. I think this is going to pave the way for them to get justice, finally.
Alan Ronkin, Dr. Jem Sullivan, thank you both. And thank you for watching. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless.